Right, good afternoon. Welcome to the session of Grade 12, June Paper 2, Memo discussion. Let's have a look at the first question. The first question says that the records were kept of the marks obtained by 50 learners in mathematics and physics. The summaries is given below. The first question is comment on the distribution of the marks in mathematics. Now, we give 2 marks for saying it is skewed to the right. In 1.1.2, we have to comment on the distribution of physics. Now, it is 2 marks for the answer, which is slightly skewed to the right. The 1.2, how many physics learners scored marks between quartile 1 and quartile 2? Well, 25% of the learners, or 12 learners. 2 marks for the answer. And the answer is either 25% or 12 learners. In 1.3, in which subjects did the learners perform better? Motivate your answer. While the learners performed better in physics. So 1 mark for physics and 1 mark for the reason. And the reason being that the median in the physics is greater than the median in maths. In 1.4.1, they need to determine the range of the physics marks, while 1 mark for saying 90 minus 15, and 1 mark for the answer of 75. In 1.4.2, we need to determine the semi-interquartile range of the mathematics marks. Now, the interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1, and the semi-interquartile range is Q3 minus Q1 divided by 2. So if we look at mathematics, we get 2 marks for saying 65 minus 35, 1 mark for that, 1 mark for saying divided by 2, and 1 mark for the answer of 15. That gives you 3 marks. Right. In question 2, they say the marks of 73 learners. So that's 73 is the number of learners, and that had to be corrected on the question paper. Now, the marks of 73 learners for exam has been summarized below, and we need to complete the table and estimate the mean of the marks. So the learners had to write in F times the midpoint, and that will give you a value of 8 times 10, which is 80, and 12 times 30, which is 360. So if they got those 3 correct, you would give 1 mark. So the 1 mark is awarded to the heading, F times the midpoint, 1 mark for as well as 80, as well as 360. And 80 is determined by the frequency times the midpoint. 8 times 10 is 80, and 12 times 30 is 360. So if they got all those 3 correct, that is the heading, 80 and 360, we allocate 1 mark. And the other mark is allocated for 700, 1890, and 1080. That means the frequency times the midpoint to give you 700, 27 times 70 to give you 1890, and 12 times 90 to give you 1080. So 700, 1890, and 1080 would be awarded 1 mark. And then 1 mark for the total, which is 4110. That will give you 3 marks for question 2.1. In question 2.2, we had to estimate the mean of the marks. Now, the mean is determined by getting the total of 4110 divided by the total number of learners, which is 73. So 1 mark for saying it's 4110 divided by 73, and 1 mark for the answer of 56,3. 2.2 is awarded 2 marks. In 2.3, we need to determine the lower quartile. 2.3, we had to give the modal class. The modal class x is greater than 40 and less or equal to 60. So 1 mark is given for the interval. In 2.4.1, we had to determine the median. Now the median is given by the formula n plus 1 divided by 2, where n is the number of learners. So 73 plus 1 divided by 2 is equal to 37. 1 mark is given for 37. And in this case, the interval is between 60, x greater than 60 and less or equal to 80. 1 mark is given for the interval. Right. In 2.4.2, we had to determine in which interval the lower quartile lies. Now, the lower quartile is given by the formula n plus 1 divided by 4, which is equal to 73 plus 1 divided by 4, which is 18,5. 1 mark is awarded for 18,5, and the other mark is given for the interval in which 18,5 is found. And x lies is greater than 20 and less or equal to 40, 1 mark for the interval. 2.4.2, 2 marks is awarded for this question. In 2.4.3, we had to determine the interval for the 90th percentile. To work out the 90th percentile, it's 90 times n plus 1 divided by 100, and that gives you an answer of 66,6, which 1 mark is allocated. And 66,6 lies in the interval between 80 and 100. X is greater than 80, less or equal to 100, 1 mark for the interval. Right, in question 3. Question 3 reads, a straight line is drawn through A with coordinates -5, 2 and B with coordinates -7, -8. Determine the equation of AB and thus write down the coordinates of the x-intercept. So the first mark is allocated for the gradient. So you use changing y over changing x. So -8 divided by -2 is -10. And -7 minus 5 is +5 over -2. -10 over -2 gives you plus 10 over 2, which is 5. 1 mark is given for the gradient of AB. 1 mark for the substitution of the gradient as well as the point, in this case -7, -8, and the 1 mark is then given for making y equal to 0, because we're working out the x-intercept, and 1 mark is given for the x value, which is -27 over 5. So in 3.1.1, we first of all going to determine the equation of AB. 1 mark for the gradient, 1 mark for substituting in a point into the equation of the straight line, 1 mark for making y equal to 0, and 1 mark for the x value, which is -27 over 5. 4 marks is allocated to 3.1.1. In question 3.1.2, we need to determine the equation of the straight line through the midpoint of AB that is perpendicular to 3y equal to 4x -10. Now, if we have to determine the straight line through the midpoint of AB, we first got to find the coordinates of the midpoint of AB. So we say -5, -7, -5 divided by 2 is -6. 2 minus 8 divided by 2 is -3. 1 mark is avoided for the midpoint, which is -6, -3. Now, 1 mark is awarded for the gradient of the line through the midpoint. Now, if it's perpendicular to the line, 3y equal to 4x -10, the gradient there is 4 over 3. So the line perpendicular to it is opposite side on the inverse, -3/4. 1 mark is avoided for -3/4. And then we need to determine the equation, so we substitute in the midpoint into the straight line formula. So we substitute in the point -6, -3, and the gradient of -3/4 into the straight line formula, and the C value is equal to -15/2. And then the equation is given as y is equal to -3/4 x, -15/2. The mark allocation was 1 for the midpoint of AB, 1 mark for -6, -3, 1 mark for the gradient of the line perpendicular to the other line through the midpoint, the other mark for the substituting the midpoint as well as the gradient which is of the line which is perpendicular, and then 1 mark for the equation of the line through the midpoint which is perpendicular to the given line. In question 3.2.1, the question is, the straight line with the gradient 3.5 moves through A with coordinates -1, 2 and cuts the x-axis and 3y equal to 2x -10 at B. Determine the length of AB. Now the first thing we need to do is to find the x value. That means basically the x-intercept. So what we're going to do in this case is we're going to write down the equation. In this case, the equation is 3y equal to 2x -10, so x is equal to 5. 1 for substituting the coordinates into the straight line equation, and 1 for the answer, which is equal to √40. 3 marks. 3.2.2, we need to determine the value of the acute angle between the two lines. Now, to determine the acute angle between the two lines, we're going to have to determine theta. So tan theta is equal to the gradient of the line, which is 7/2. So theta is equal to 74,05. Now, to work out alpha, now the tan of alpha is the gradient of that line, which is 2/3. So alpha is equal to 33,69. 1 mark is avoided for theta, which is 74,05. 1 mark for alpha, which is 33,69. And in this case, we can say if this angle here is alpha, that's vertically opposite, so that's alpha, and therefore theta is equal to beta plus alpha. Theta is equal to beta plus alpha, and therefore you could work out beta. So beta is equal to theta minus alpha, and the answer is equal to 40,36, the exterior angle of a triangle. 1 mark for theta, 1 mark for alpha, 1 mark for beta, and 1 for the reason. 4 marks for question 3.2.2. Right, in question 4.1, here they say M with coordinates -4, -1, N with coordinates 2, 3, and P with coordinates 1, -2 are the vertices of the triangle MNP. MD is a line joining the vertex M to D on NP. Show that -1, 1 is the midpoint of the circle through MNP if MN is the diameter. So now, if we got the midpoint of MN, then we've got basically the center of the circle. So 2 marks for substituting, for the substitution of -4 plus 2 divided by 2, and 2 marks is given for the substitution of -1 plus 3 divided by 2. No mark is given for -1, 1, because they say show that the midpoint is given by -1, 1. In 4.2, we need to give the equation of the circle through MNP. To get the equation of the circle, we're going to use the midpoint. So here we can to say x plus 1 ought to be squared plus y negative 1 ought to be squared is equal to r squared. Then we substitute any point that the circle passes through. In this case, I substituted negative 4, negative 1. You could have also substituted another point. So if I substitute negative 4, negative 1, then we can work out the r squared value to be 13, because negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3 squared is 9, and negative 2 squared is 4. 9 plus 4 is 13. So x plus 1 squared plus y minus 1 squared is equal to 13. 1 mark for writing x plus 1 squared plus y minus 1 squared. 1 mark is given for that. 1 mark for the r squared value of 13. 2 marks avoided for 4.2. In 4.3, they say to determine the equation of the tangent to the circle at n. Now the gradient of the radius, in this case, is 2/3. So the gradient of the tangent is opposite sign and the inverse. 1 mark is given for the gradient of 2/3. 1 mark for the gradient of the tangent, which is minus 3/2. And 1 mark is given for the equation y is equal to negative 3/2x plus 6. That is your 3rd mark. In 4.2, the line that is bisecting MPN is perpendicular on MN at D. If MD at DN is in the ratio 2:4, show that the area of MPD as to MNP is 1/3 or 1:3. Now, 1 mark for the ratio. MD over DN is 2x over 4x, or just 2/4, 1 mark for the ratio. 1 mark to say that DN is equal to twice MD. And the other mark is that the area of MPD is equal to half MD times PD. 1 mark for the area of MNP, which is half MD plus DN times PD. Now, in this case, we can say that the area of triangle MPD over the area of triangle MNP is given as half MD times PD over half MD plus 2MD times PD. Remember, in this case, 1 mark for MD plus twice MD. 1 mark for that. And if you simplify, in this case, we've got the ratio. PD's cancel out. A half cancels out, so it's MD over 3MD, which is 1/3. Area of triangle MPD over the area of triangle MNP is equal to 1/3. That's another mark for the ratio. And question 4.4 is given as 6 marks. In question 5.1, they say if x is an element of 0 to 360, determined without a calculator and showing all steps the precise values of x. Now 2 sine of 2x is equal to negative 1. So 1 mark is given for sine of 2x equal to negative a half. Now the reference angle is 30 degrees. So 1 mark is given for sine is negative in the 3rd quadrant, 180 degrees plus 30, and it's also negative in the 4th quadrant, 36 degrees minus 30. So 2x is equal to, in this case, to 10, so x is 105. 2x is equal to, in this case, 230, so x is equal to 165. 1 mark for saying the sine of 2x is negative a half. 1 mark for saying 2x is equal to 180 plus 30. 1 mark for saying 2x is equal to 360 minus 30. Now, and the last mark is for both answers, x equal to 105 and x equal to 165. In 5.2.2, we need to determine the square root of the square root of sine x to the power of 4. Now the square root of that is sine squared x, and the square root of sine squared x is sine x. So by 1 mark for applying the law and 1 mark for finding the answer. In 5.3, they say without a calculator and showing all steps, show that the sine of 66 divided by the sine of 22 minus the cos of 66 over the cos of 22 is equal to 2. We need to show that. So 1 mark for, if you subtract fractions, you find the LCD. 1 mark for the LCD, which is sine 22 cos 22, and 1 mark for the numerator, which is sine 66 times the cos of 22 minus the cos of 66 times the sine of 22. Right. In this case, 1 mark is given for simplifying that, applying the compound angle, which is the sine of the first angle minus the second angle. Sine of 66 minus 22 is given a mark. One mark for simplifying it to the sine of 44, and 1 mark for saying that the sine of 44 can be rewritten as the sine of 2 times 22 or the sine of 22 plus 22. 1 mark is given for any of those two forms for this in the numerator. And then 1 mark for applying the double angle of the sine of 2 times 22 to 2 sine 22 cos 22, and that cancels out to give you 2. Sorry. I'm going to just repeat that step there. The sine of 44 is 1 mark, and then 44 can be rewritten as the sine of 2 times 22 or the sine of 22 plus 22, 1 mark for any of those two forms. And then 1 mark for saying that the double angle is equal to the sine of 2 times 22 is 2 sine 22 cos 22, 1 mark for writing it as in this form, and then that cancels out to give you 2, which is equal to the right hand side. In 5.4, we have to prove the following. We've got to show that 1 plus sine of 2x divided by the cos of 2x is equal to sine x plus cos x over cos x minus sine x. Now, your first step is to change the sine of 2x to 2 sine x cos x. 1 mark for that expansion. 1 mark for saying that the cos of 2x is cos squared x minus sine squared x. 1 mark for that. Then to change 1 to sine squared x plus cos squared x. 1 mark for that. And then to find the factors. If you're going to factorize the numerator, this here is sine squared x plus 2 sine x cos x plus cos squared x. We can factorize that to sine x plus cos x, sine x plus cos x, 1 mark. And if we have to factorize, in this case, cos squared x minus sine squared x to cos x minus sine x, cos x plus sine x, 1 mark for the factors in the denominator. And then if you simplify, we get the right hand side, so that is avoided, that we give 5 marks to. In question 5.5, they say if x is equal to 120 and y is equal to 330, show without a calculator that the cos of 2x minus y is not equal to cos of 2x minus the cos of y. Now let's just substitute. Here we can substitute that x is equal to 120 and y is equal to 330. So it's 240 minus 330 to give you cos of negative 90, and the cos of negative 90 is 0. 1 mark for simplifying it to 240 minus 30, 1 mark for negative 90, and 1 mark for the 0. If we look at the right hand side, in this case, we can say that 120 degrees is equal to 180 degrees minus 60. 180 degrees minus 60 will give you 120. And in this case, the cos of 30 is the cos of 360 minus 30. So this gives you, second quadrant cos is negative, negative cos 60. And this is the fourth quadrant cos is positive, positive cos of 30. So it is minus cos 30. And if you then use your special angles, negative cos 60 is negative a half, negative cos 30 is negative root 3 over 2. And because the left-hand side is 0 and the right-hand side is negative a half, negative root 3 over 2, the left-hand side is not equal to the right-hand side, and that is what we need to show. In 5.6.1, they say if it is given that 2 cos theta is equal to root 3 and theta and beta are complementary angles, by making use of a diagram and no calculator, determine the value of the cos beta. Now, in this case, we can say BC is equal to 1 because we are making use of our special angles. So 1 mark for BC equal to 1. And 1 mark for the cos of beta equal to a half. The answer for that, we allocate another mark. Right, if we have to determine in 5.6.2 the sine of theta minus beta, and we give 1 mark for the expanded form, that's sine theta cos beta minus cos theta sine beta, 1 mark, and 1 mark for the substitution, sine theta is a half, cos beta is a half, cos theta is root 3 over 2, sine beta is root 3 over 2, 1 mark for the substitution of those 4 functions, trig functions, and then that will give you a quarter minus 3 over 4, which is equal to negative 2 over 4, which is negative a half. So 1 mark is allocated for the answer. So 1 mark is for the expansion of the compound angle of sine, 1 mark for substituting in sine theta cos theta sine beta from the diagram, and 1 mark for the answer. Right, in question 5.6.3, we need to determine the tan of 2 beta minus 2 cos beta. Now the tan of 2 beta is sine 2 beta of the cos of 2 beta, 1 mark for that. The next mark is for the expansion of sine of 2 beta to 2 sine beta cos beta, and the expansion of cos of 2 beta to cos squared beta minus sine squared beta. So 1 mark for the numerator of the expansion of sine 2 beta, 1 mark for the expansion of the cos of 2 beta, and then 1 mark for substituting the values. Now the sine of 2 beta is root 3 over 2, cos 2 beta is a half. Now the cos squared beta is a half squared, sine squared beta root 3 over 2 squared minus 2, and the cos of beta is a half. So 1 mark is for the substitution of sine beta, cos squared beta, sine squared beta, and cos beta. And then for the simplification of the numerator, the 2's cancel out to give you root 3 over 2, 1 mark for the simplification of the numerator. And then for the simplification of the denominator, 1 mark. And then for the final answer, which is negative root 3, negative 1, we allocate 1 mark. So this here gives you 7 marks. In question 6, 6.1, they say sketch the graphs of fx equal to the sine of x minus 60 degrees. We've got to sketch that, and gx equal to cos x plus a half in the interval negative 180 to 120. Now for the f graph, which is this graph here, the x-intercepts we give 1 mark, and the x-intercepts is negative 120 and 60 degrees. 1 mark for the y-intercept, in this case it's negative 0.87. So 1 mark for the y-intercept of negative 0.87, 1 mark for both x-intercepts of negative 20 and 60, and 1 mark for the shape. If we look at the G graph, which is this graph here, the cos graph, 1 mark for the x-intercepts of negative 120 and 120, 1 mark for the y-intercept of 1,5, and 1 mark is allocated to the shape. That gives you 6 marks for the sketching of the graph. Then we have to use the graph and give the range of G. Now we allocate 2 marks for this. That means 1 mark for the critical values, or the values of negative 0,5 and 1,5, and 1 mark to say for the notation that it includes negative half and 1,5. So you could also have rewritten this as we had to determine the range, so we can say that y is greater or equal to negative a half, but less or equal to 1,5. So 1 mark for the critical values and 1 mark for the correct notation. In 6.2.2, we allocate 2 marks for the period of f, which is 360 degrees. In 6.3.1, we have to give the values of x in the interval negative 180 to 120, where sine x cos 60 negative cos x sine 60 is equal to 0. So that means where the two graphs, basically, where the sine graph is equal to 0, and that will be the x-intercepts, 1 mark for saying x equal to negative 120, and 1 mark for saying x is equal to 60. In 6.3.2, here we have to determine the values of x in the interval negative 180 to 120, where so the 2 sine x minus 60 minus 1 is equal to 2 cos x. The first step is to take the negative 1 across, so it becomes plus 1, then divide by 2, so here we get cos x plus a half. Now if we look at that, by manipulating that to that, then these two graphs are the graphs that are drawn. And where are they equal means where do they intersect? They intersect at negative 120 and here, which is 90, x equal to 90. So 1 mark for rewriting it in this form, which is basically in the form where the two graphs are given, and then 1 for the x value of negative 120 and 1 mark for the x value of 90. 3 marks allocated to 6.3.2. Right, in question 7.1. They say 2 people standing respectively at A and B see a helicopter H hovering at 250 meters directly above C. The angles of elevation from A and B respectively to H is 26,6 and 21,8. Calculate the distance between the observers A and B if ACB is equal to 104,5. So here, for giving the correct ratio, tan of 21,8 is 250.